stop the countdown? Why do we let so many things in life go by without hesitation? Counting down to the moments that mean so much, and in a single second they disappear. Gone. That moment is history. It's over forever. We count down to our wedding, get excited for Christmas, and we can't wait till we graduate. We say, I can't wait, but when it's over, what do we have to show for it? As we look at the life of Jesus, everything that he said and did was counting down to an event that would signify the end of one thing and the beginning of something new. We find Jesus is different from our expectations. He's no victim. He's not passive. He's not weak. And when his countdown runs out, everything changes. Nothing is the same.
Well, hey, if you're visiting today, let me get you caught up to speed on exactly where we are and what we're doing. We've been looking at the last week of Jesus' life. Traditionally, this is Palm Sunday. So Palm Sunday is when you have all the kids come in with the fronds and stuff. We're not doing that this week. This week, we're actually looking at Friday of the last week of Jesus' life here on earth. And Friday is a difficult day. But before we get into that, let me explain to you why a few hundred folks are gathering throughout this series and going through this countdown of Jesus' life. And it's basically this. This entire experiment has been laser focused on one main key objective, and it's this. We just want to make sure that Jesus we're following, or the one that we've rejected, we just want to make sure it's the real Jesus. So in other words, if I'm going to decide to follow Jesus, I just want to make sure it's the real one and not some idea that somebody had. Or if I'm going to reject Jesus altogether, we just want to make sure that we're rejecting the real Jesus and not just somebody's opinion about Jesus. And so we've been kind of looking at that. I think many of us have been sort of taught a bad Jesus. And when I think about some of the ways that Jesus has been portrayed, I think, man, I wouldn't follow that either. I wouldn't want to be behind that guy either. And so we've been looking at that together, and we've been trying to say, is this the real Jesus? And we've been trying to figure that out for ourselves. And because if it is, if we can rediscover the real Jesus, and if we can maybe for the first time see Jesus as he really is, then there's a massively important implication from arriving at that point, and it's this. If Jesus is who he said he was, then all of the promises he made can be true for me. Understand what I am saying here. Everything that you read in Scripture that Jesus said can be true for me. But not only that, if we find the real Jesus, and he's who he said he was, then all the teachings he gave are essential for me. You follow me? Now, just a warning, today isn't Feel-Good Sunday. I mean, to be honest, we preachers sort of like to rush past today, and you church people like when we rush past today, because it's a difficult day in our countdown of Holy Week. It's a day of injustice, of pain, and of loss, and it's okay today if you don't leave feeling up and chipper. It's okay if your heart hurts a little bit today, or if you wipe a tear, that's okay. It's just a perfectly natural thing as we go through this. And you may say, so Tom, in light of that terrible introduction, why are we spending all of this time looking at the horrific events of Friday? Why wouldn't we just move on past it? And I guess my answer to that would be is because Scripture gives a significant amount of space to Friday. And this is really strange. If you've ever read a biography like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., most of the time those biographies, they died violent political sort of deaths. Most of the time those biographies would give 10% or less to talking about their deaths. What's interesting about Jesus is this. Jesus' story is recorded in 4 books called the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 4 guys that followed Jesus, and those 4 guys wrote a book about Jesus. And each of those books include the death of Jesus. In fact, they give over a third of the space in Scripture to the story of Jesus' last week of his life. Now, to tell you what a big deal that is, anybody ever heard of Christmas? Yeah, right. Well, Christmas is only told in 2 of those books. It's not even mentioned in the other 2. And yet the death, the last week of Jesus' life, it is told throughout the gospel stories. So there's apparently something in the dying of Jesus that's important for me as a person who seeks to follow the real Jesus. Now, if you're like me, I start to feel sorry for this Jesus on Friday. I start to think, man, the guy was bullied, the guy was weak, he was a victim, he was taken advantage of. And as I think about all that, I think, man, he wasn't able to help himself, and this whole thing just doesn't seem fair or real, and so I wrestle with that. But you know, as we've been walking through this series, one of the things that I've learned about this Jesus is he was anything but weak. And up to this point, I had kind of assumed Jesus was the Melba Toast, Hallmark card, burn some incense, and any other sort of kind of anemic sort of thing. I think that's kind of who this Jesus was. But when I read about the real Jesus, I think, man, this dude, he was reverently, he was a stud. I mean, I don't know how you're supposed to say that. He was strong and powerful. Do you realize in a span of 24 hours, he was interrogated 6 different times? Think about the fortitude that it took to go through that. He was beaten, humiliated, ultimately condemned to die after being traded for a murderer named Barabbas. Now, here's the thing we have to acknowledge as we go deeper into Friday. At any point, Jesus could have tapped out and avoided all of this. Jesus could have just said the word and none of this would have happened. In fact, do you remember when he's before Pilate? Here was the exchange that took place. Pilate says to Jesus, "Where do you come from?" And Jesus, he doesn't give an answer. He's just silent. And Pilate's frustrated. "Are you refusing to speak to me, Jesus?" And Jesus doesn't say anything. And then Pilate says this, "Don't you realize that I have power either to free you or to crucify you? All you have to do is say the word." Now you think about that. The real Jesus had an opportunity to tap out, and yet he doesn't. He doesn't walk away. He doesn't run from it. He actually takes it on the chin. And I marvel at that. So Friday happens. And only God really knows the full implications at this point of why Friday has to happen. Only God understood that this was the only way. Only God felt the complete and truest depth of pain because of the events of Friday. And you know, the suffering thing to me, as I've studied it over this particular season, the stunning thing is how completely alone Jesus was. I mean, I get the whole cross and crucifixion and all that, but you know, for me, that's pain. And I guess everybody's sort of wired in a different way. But the most painful part of that particular Friday to me wasn't the physical blood-producing stuff. It was the emotional wrenching that went on. Because as Jesus stands before his accusers, you know what stuns me? How completely and utterly alone Jesus is. Now, just think about this. Where are the people that were in the crowd when Jesus grabbed the fish and the bread from the little boy's lunch and fed everybody? Where are those people? Where are the people that had leprosy and now they don't? Where are the people that used to be they couldn't walk and now they can dance? Where's the dude who was laying by the pool for 38 some odd years and now the man can walk? Where are the people that were blind, now they can see? Where are the people that were at the party when they ran out of wine and Jesus turned the whole swimming pool into wine? Where are those people? Because certainly they were in the crowd and hearing the trial, agree? They were just too far reaching, too much of an impact. Where were the people that were standing outside of the tomb when Lazarus walked out? And I think they're all there doing this. And I know the pain of being beaten and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm assuming that's painful. But certainly, this had to hurt Jesus, huh? Certainly that moment had to be emotionally wrenching for Jesus. He has no defenders at the trial. He's completely, utterly, ashamedly alone. Not a single witness. And you know what even bothers me even deeper, just as long as I'm out here on this branch? Not even God comes to the defense of his own son. Just the day before, we had a voice from heaven. Do you remember when Jesus began his ministry and the whole dove thing flies down and sits around, and the voice from heaven, this is my son? You remember that? Nothing this day. Nothing. Do you remember when Jesus was born, the whole choir, that's a trumpet. The whole choir doing little trumpet things, Do you remember that? No choir, no trumpet, nothing. Just crickets, man. There was nothing. I'll take you to Matthew's account. It's one of those Gospels. It's one of the guys who wrote a book who followed Jesus. This is what he said. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, these are all the smart Jewish guys, were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. Now, don't miss this because it's Easter and we're in church. These guys were hunting his head. These are assassins. This isn't a trial. They want to take Jesus out, looking for false evidence. Why? So we can string him up. That's the tenor of what's happening, the emotional, gut-wrenching stuff. Jesus, they go against false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death, but they didn't find any. Even though they brought false witnesses before. This is a sham. It's a setup. This is just for the cameras. The decision's already been made. This is just to sway public opinion. Finally, two guys came forward and said, this fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. He said that 3 years ago when he was being baptized by John the Baptist, and we all know he was actually talking about himself. But that's for Sunday, and I'm not going to tell you about that until next week. What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you, Jesus? They asked him. But Jesus doesn't say anything. Now, before we go any further, I don't know why you're here. But I want you to know we are getting ready to go someplace together that will mess you up. And I want to tell you that. Because we are getting ready to hear one of the most profound truths, in fact, the most profound truth that has altered the world. And I know it's Sunday, and I know you're sitting in a padded chair, and everybody looks and smells good. I know that everybody's thinking about lunch. But listen, we are getting ready to go to a place for the first time in all of Scripture where something is said that changes the world. It'll be a line in the sand moment for some of you in the room. In fact, it'll be a line in the sand moment for probably all of us in the room. Because after we're getting ready to read what we're getting ready to read, everybody in this room will be forced to make a decision of whether or not you believe or don't believe what was being said. The implications of your answer will not only change you, but you need to understand it will change the generations that come after you. That's how significant this moment is. And because this moment is so significant, and because I could figure no other way to do this, I want to ask you to do something we don't normally do, and that is I would like to ask you to stand for what is getting ready to be revealed in Scripture. So would you do that? All you have to do right now is listen, not to me, but to the Scripture. The high priest said to Jesus, I charge you under oath by the living God. Now what that is, that's the Jewish triple dog dare. Really, it's what it is. It was a way that you had to answer it. There was no way out of it. The high priest says, I challenge you. You have to say this. And so Jesus has to respond. Tell us, he says, if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And everything is silent. And then Jesus says, Yes, it is as you say. Jesus just said he was the Son of God. Jesus just said he was the Messiah, the Son of God, the one the prophets had predicted would come. And Jesus just said, I'm the dude, loosely translated. And so what that means is everybody in the room has to make a decision right now. Either Jesus was telling the truth or Jesus is a liar. Maybe seated. And that's exactly the decision that was before the people that day. One said, acknowledge the truth, and the other said, let's not acknowledge the truth. Let's call him a blasphemer and put him to death. And the people that were listening to Jesus that day, they chose the last one. He's a blasphemer. Let's put the dude to death. They rejected the one who came as their Messiah and King. Now, to be honest, every time I read this story at this time of year, I always think I'm among the faithful. I always think that in the story, I would be amongst the faithful. I would be the ones to say, stand up for Jesus. You know, that's what we people do. We think, well, we would never be like them. But this year, as I was doing my study, I found myself thinking, I don't really blame those people who rejected Jesus as their Messiah. Because the reality is, everybody in this room has done the exact same thing. Everybody in this room has stood just like we did a few seconds ago and made the decision. Now, the dude must be a liar. I like to think I'm on the side of those who win, who wear the white hats and do the right thing, but life has moments when I wasn't faithful, and so does yours. Who hasn't faced temptation to give in to what they didn't want to do? Who hasn't faced the temptation to pursue an addiction or to pursue an abuse of an addiction? Who hasn't given in to temptation to hold relationships at arm's length or to cause pain to other people? Who hasn't faced the temptation to not forgive? Come on. Who hasn't faced the temptation to not do as scriptures teach we're supposed to do with issues related to money? And so I was thinking about it this week, and I was thinking about the emotional stuff, and I was thinking about Jesus all bound up and surrounded by armed guards and most likely stripped naked at this point, looking completely helpless and alone. And Jesus looked to the least like a Messiah of anybody in the room. He looked kind of puny. And so when the people are rejecting him and saying he must be a blasphemer, you know, when we hear it, we think, yes, I'm the Son of God. But it wasn't that. It was puny. It was, oh, yes, I am the Son of God. And nobody in the room believed him. At least they didn't want to. And I say all that to say this. Let's not be too harsh on the people who rejected Jesus, because we've all done that. And I apologize for what follows. But we have to go here. And I've tried to figure out a way to say this. It used to be that pastors would give you a credible description, but the Passion took care of all that, and we can never top what happened in the Passion movie. And so, but it's important we understand the injustice and the indignity and the shame endured by God's Son, that now he has said he is God's Son. So let's make sure we're clear on that. They stripped God's Son naked and spat in his face and struck him with their fists and the crown of thorns and all that. This is the Son of God. He just said he was. And I was thinking, you know, a corpse is really just a corpse. And it wasn't enough to just want to kill Jesus. They wanted to mock him and embarrass him, because that's when you put the movement down. If all it was killing him, well, maybe they'll just make another martyr out of him and we'll still have this faith problem. So instead, they kept him for alive as long as they could so that everybody could mock him. Again, friends, it's the emotional tension that was killing Jesus. And the Jewish and Roman leaders worked to mock. And this is taken from Philip Yancey. He's speaking from the voice of the guards. Messiah, huh? Great. Let's hear a prophecy. Wham. Did you see that coming? Who hit you, huh? Wham, wham. Come on, tell us. Spit it out, Mr. Prophet. Man, for a Messiah, you don't know much, do you? You say you're a king? Hey, Captain, get a load of this. We have us a king here. Well, then let's all kneel down before his honor. Wait a minute. Our king doesn't have a crown. That's never going to do. Here, Mr. King, we found this crown, and we'll put it on your... Wait, it's crooked. Let's straighten it up this way. I'll fix that. Hey, hold still. Why are you squirming? My, look how modest we are, Mr. King. Well, how about a robe then? Something to cover up that bloody mess on your back. What happened? Did your majesty take a tumble? And it went on like that all day Friday. The professional punishers had their way with Jesus. And before you let yourself off the hook, and before I let myself off, the spectators, we also participated. Because we shouted our catcalls and mockery even when he was on the cross. That is the one who said he was the Son of God, the long-awaited Messiah. And Jesus heard the jeers. If only they would have done something to his ears so he didn't have to hear what was being said. Because I think the ears might have been the greatest point of torture for Jesus. And the crowd, as he's sitting there on a cross with whatever's involved, you call yourself a Messiah? Well, then come down off that cross. How in the world are you going to save all of us if you can't even save yourself? One of the writers' Gospels, Mark, he says, the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, 3 hours. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? You see, God was silent. And Jesus is alone. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last on Friday. And the curtain of the temple tore from top to bottom. When the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard this cry and how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. There were two choices. One is to believe and bow down and worship. One is to reject and call him a blasphemer. And the centurion says, I made the wrong choice. Now listen, without meaning to be irreverent here, the events of Friday all lead to a very important question. So what? You with me? Okay, Tom, I get it. Tragic story, man dies, it's terrible. So what? The injustice of it all is plain for everybody to see. Everybody, you don't have to be a Christian. Everybody understands it's terrible suffering. Compassion for someone suffering to this extent, it's all part of us. But what does it mean? And why are we still talking about this Friday 2,000 years later? I mean, he wasn't the only dude sacrificed on a cross. That happened all the time. So what made this particular crucifixion distinct? Well, the rest of the story is next week. But I want to answer the question. And in order to answer the question, you have to be willing in this moment to look within yourself. Stay with me. I'm not playing a joke on you. I just want you to kind of go down the same path I've gone down here a recent day. Look inside of yourself, not just the highlights, but look at the stuff you're embarrassed about. Are you with me? Everybody play. Look at the shame producers and the guilt producers. Look at the time that you gave into the addiction and it actually caused pain to someone you love. You look there. Look at the sexual experimentation that resulted in embarrassment and shame to the point where we hope no one ever finds out. Look at the tongue and the lies that you have received and the lies that you have shared in order to cause pain to someone. Look at what might have been stolen or the times that you weren't faithful. Look at those things. And like me, as you look at those things, here's what you know, here's what I know. Those things produced pain and hurt and shame for all of us. Everybody with me? Those things have produced shame for all of us. And it's not just true of this room, it's true of the entire planet. So here's the thing. Don't you think if it was in human ability to scrub shame away, that we would have already done it? You follow me? Come on. If it was just dependent on you, wouldn't you already have scrubbed the shame away? In fact, it's not just you folks that are Christian folk. The whole planet would have scrubbed shame away. The whole planet would have said, oh man, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I'm getting rid of that. All those events that happened back there last year, last month, or last night, all those things that produce shame and make me feel crappy inside and dark and yucky, all that stuff. If there was a way I could free myself from it, I would have done it. But many of us in the room have come to the realization there is no way. If forgiveness were something we could do for ourselves, then the whole planet would be shame-free and guilt-free. But humanity, my life and your life, is a testament to the reality that we are not able to forgive in and of ourselves. And that's the answer to the so what. We're not able to remove our own shame, otherwise there wouldn't be shame anywhere in the world. But the enlightened people that walk in light, not darkness, the people that made this choice and not that one, understand there is something inside of us that is wrong, and we know it. And you don't need a pastor to tell you that, because you know it, and so do I. And despite my best efforts, I can't scrub myself clean, and neither can you. The wise person is the one who understands we lack the ability to save ourselves from what the Bible calls sin, those shame and guilt-producing things in our lives. The wise people in the room understand we need saving. We need something outside of all that this is to come in and rescue me. Because I've tried for years to do it myself and I can't. Huh? And this is where God enters the picture. And God saw what was needed. And only God understood and paid the price with a son, Lewis Smead summarized Friday with these words. At the cross, God was punishing Jesus for the sins of the world. And God's justice required a penalty from sinners. And in his unspeakable love, he paid the penalty himself in the person of his crucified son. And guys, that is why Friday matters. It's why we can't rush to Sunday in this feel-good Christian world we live in. It's why it's important that our hearts hurt a little bit this morning. On Friday, the way for me to be forgiven and the way for you to be forgiven was opened, and the pathway to freedom from shame and guilt was revealed, and it didn't come from within us. It came from outside of us to us. Because we all know we can't do it ourselves. And that's why this day matters. It's why it matters not just to people in this room, but it matters to your family. It matters to your marriage. It matters in your profession. And it will matter, hear me on this, for generations to come. What you decide based on what you heard Jesus say. Yes, he is the Son of God, the Messiah, the long-awaited anointed one. Or he's a liar.